Bonjour et bienvenue à ce webinaire ouvert à tous. Avant de commencer, pour ceux qui ne nous connaissent pas, je m'appelle Cecilia. Je suis une professeure d'anglais natif et le Cercle des langues est une école d'anglais en ligne pour les adultes. Nous proposons des formations d'anglais sur mesure en fonction de vos objectifs, de votre niveau et de votre budget. Et la bonne nouvelle, c'est que nos formations sont finançables par CPF. So I will return to English now to begin the lesson and say welcome again to everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, where we will be covering an all-important business English topic, which is how to plan a business meeting. Now, do let me know in the chat if you can all hear me properly. So, hello Sylvie, how are you doing? Yes, please go ahead and say hello. Hello Akil, how are you today? So perhaps business meetings are a big part of your role at work, but they're something you find challenging. How you plan a business meeting will decide how productive and useful a business meeting is, which is why it's so important that you get it right. But there are lots and lots of things to think about when planning a business meeting, which can make it quite difficult. Please do let me know in the chat, are meetings something you have to plan often at work? Are there any particular challenges you have faced when trying to plan a business meeting? So do let me know in the chat, and I hope by the end of this webinar, you'll be feeling much more confident in planning a business meeting in English. So we're going to get started. Now, before you can actually start with the content of the meeting, you need to think about the practicalities of the meeting, perhaps where it's going to take place. So we'll start by looking at the types of venue where you can choose to hold your meeting. So for starters, we have a conference room. Now, a conference room is a big room that is specifically designed for meetings. There will often be a big table in there, a round table, so that everyone can sit around the same table. And of course, it will have enough chairs. And similarly, a boardroom is another type of big meeting room, which again, will usually have a large table with many chairs for people to sit around. And in order to decide, of course, once you've found your room, you need to have a little bit more detail on where it's located. So it will be a room in a building. Now, the building is the larger structure that the room is found in, sorry. So it might be a building on your campus where you work, or it might be a building anywhere, but that can be a way to identify the place from the street where you are going to have your meeting. And inside the building, of course, buildings are often divided into lots of different levels. And we usually would call this a floor. So you can have the first floor. This X here just signifies it can be exchanged for a number. So the first floor, or the second floor, the third floor. For instance, here at La Tour, we are on the 53rd floor. So that is quite high up, but this is important information you're going to need so that you can identify where you want to host your meeting. Now, we'll think about any equipment you might need. So sometimes an empty room with just some chairs and some tables is enough for you to carry out your meeting, but you might also need some additional equipment. So first of all, we have a screen. So a screen is something like a television. It will allow you to display information digitally, electronically. And then we also have a projector. So a projector projects an image. It shows an image onto a surface. So you might project onto a screen, but you could also project onto a wall or a big piece of cloth, for instance, so that you could show some information in a larger display. Next, we have an interactive whiteboard. This is a bit more technologically advanced. Of course, a regular whiteboard is just a big white surface which you can write on and then rub out what you've written. And you use special pens, you can see them in the picture here, called whiteboard markers, which allow you to wipe off the whiteboard. And it's important that you use these because if you use non-whiteboard markers, they might not come off the whiteboard. But this can be helpful in a meeting if you want to write down some ideas or anything like that. You can display it on a whiteboard. And an interactive whiteboard is just an electronic version of a whiteboard that allows you to use your computer through there. You can draw things more digitally rather than with a real pen. And then a rubber is what you use to erase or get rid of what you have written on the whiteboard. Now, this is a bit more of the old school way to use a flip chart, but a flip chart is a big square of paper. Well, it's a notepad, a large notepad, which you can stand up and then you can turn over the pages. So you fill out a page and then turn over the page and fill out another page. And it's, I suppose, like a whiteboard, except you can't rub anything out. So you just have to go onto the next page. That is a flip chart. Now, a speakerphone. This is something which perhaps is a little bit less common now that we all use things like Zoom and Teams. But if you want to have a meeting and not everyone in the meeting is in the room, or you need to make a call to someone outside, you will want everyone to be able to hear who is on the other end of the phone at the same time. So you can use a speakerphone, which you can put in the middle of the table, which will allow everyone to hear at the same time. And these last two are factor into when you're booking a room. So of course, when you are deciding which room you would like to have your meeting in, you need to take into consideration that you will probably have a need for electricity to plug in maybe your laptop or anything. Akil, yes, a flip chart, I suppose, is the same as a paperboard. It's just a large piece of paper that you can write on and then turn over to the next one, if that's what a paperboard is. And then, so as I mentioned, you will need access to electricity. So you will want to check that your room has plug sockets. Now, these are the plug socket is the little thing in the wall which allows you to plug in your wire, and it will connect you to the mains electricity, and then an extension cord. If you want to, of course, the number of plug sockets might be limited. If you want to be able to plug in more electronic items, then you will need an extension cord, which turns one plug socket into lots of different plug sockets so that multiple people can plug in at the same time. Now, finally, we will have a look at changing plans in terms of logistics. So not everything is going to go to plan. Sometimes a meeting can't take place when you had planned it for a variety of reasons. So we're going to have a look at some of the complications that might arise and how to communicate them to your guests. So to start, we have double booked. Now, double booked is a phrase that means that two things have been arranged to happen at the same time. So you could say, I have double booked myself. That means I have signed up to do two things at the same time, which of course is very difficult and you will have to end up not doing one of them. You can also say a room is double booked. So perhaps you had turned up to a room that you thought you had booked and you see there's someone else in that room and they say, excuse me, we booked this room as well. then you'll say, oh dear, this room has been double booked. 2 people have been arranged to be in here at the same time, or 2 groups have been arranged to be here at the same time. So another type of situation that might arise that will cause you to need to change the time of a meeting could be a calendar error. So this is when you have made a mistake in your calendar. Perhaps you didn't notice that there was an event you were supposed to be going to, or that there was another meeting you were supposed to be at that time. And similarly, a schedule conflict. So conflict is when 2 things are fighting against one another. So if you have a schedule conflict, this means that you have 2 items in your schedule that are fighting against each other in the same slot, in the same time slot. So it means the same thing as double booked, essentially. And then another phrase you might use to excuse yourself from a meeting, or to let your guests know that you won't be able to do a meeting at the same time, is to say that something came up. Now, this is quite vague. And by vague, I mean that it doesn't give a lot of detail. Of course, to say something came up, you're not telling them what the thing was. But this is an accepted way in among colleagues to say that something has come up and that you're unable to attend a meeting. Of course, you will probably include an apology, but you can say something came up without giving too much detail. And so if any of these situations have occurred, then you will need to change the time of the meeting, or perhaps you won't have the meeting at all. So we have 3 words which can mean to change the time. So postpone means specifically to make later. So if we postpone something, we are pushing it back in time. Now, reschedule and move also mean to change time, but they don't have to mean making it later. You could reschedule a meeting to earlier than you had initially planned, or move a meeting to earlier than you had initially planned. But a meeting that is postponed will always be later than you had initially planned. And then finally, if the meeting is not going to happen at all, perhaps you're not going to be in work for the next week and the time will have passed, you can cancel the meeting. So cancel is final. It means it is not going to happen. So I hope you have all been listening. We're going to have a quick test of your knowledge. So can anyone tell me what these 3 items are called? Please write in the chat box what these 3 items are called. Yes, great, Delphine. So number 1 is a flip chart. You can write the number next to the number next to your answer, just so I know which question you are responding to. Brilliant. So Stefan, I'm guessing you are looking at number 3. That is indeed a speakerphone. So for number 2 is not quite a plug socket. Can you think of what else it could be if it's not a plug socket? Sylvie, yes, not quite plug socket. Does anyone remember what this item is called? Very close, Stefan. Not quite an extended cord, but you are on the right lines. Does anyone else have an idea? Extended cord is very close, but it's not quite right. Not quite, just a little problem with the end of the word. So it's not an extended cable or an extended cord. Yes, perfect. Thank you, Christine. So it's an extension cable or an extension cord. So we have a flip chart. As you can see, the paper is flipped over once they've used the first page. Then the extension cord, which, as you can see, has lots of different places to plug in your plug. And then finally, the speakerphone. You can see the big speaker on there. Brilliant, thank you. So what is the phrase we use to mean two things being arranged at the same time? And I realize this is a bit ambiguous, so we will use it to refer to exactly. So Christelle, very nice. That is double booked. Brilliant. So you got the right one, even though it could have been two of them, I suppose. A schedule conflict, it also could have been, but very well done. You all got double booked. And finally, what is the word used to mean the level of a building? Yes, great. Floor. Very nice. So I'm glad to see you've all been listening so far. May it continue. Brilliant. So once you have planned your meeting and chosen who you would like to come, then of course you need to let all of these people know that you expect to see them there and provide them with any information that will help them to properly take part in the meeting. So of course, this begins with when the meeting is going to happen. So we have some different prepositions that we can use to talk about time. So to start with, we have in. Now, in is of course used for location, to talk about place. But if we are thinking about time, we would use in to talk about a length of time away. So you could say, we are having a meeting in 2 days' time, or I would like to have a meeting in a week's time. It's about how long the meeting is away in the future. Now, we also have the preposition at. So at is used for a specific time on the clock. So we will say at 1 o'clock, at 4 o'clock, at 6 o'clock. Then we also have on. Another preposition. So on is used for a date. So on the 10th of June. And it's also used for a day of the week. So on Tuesday. And you could say on Thursday, the 10th of June, and combine it all together. And in terms of describing phrases to form the complete sentence, you can say the meeting is held at, or the meeting will be held. Held means it will take place. If you are holding a meeting, you are getting everyone together for a meeting. So you will say the meeting will be held at 4 p.m. on Tuesday. And then if you're talking about the range of time, of course, a meeting will last a certain amount of time. So you will say the meeting will be held from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. So from, and then the start time, and then to, and the end time of the meeting. Now we have some other time phrases here. So in terms of talking about hours on the clock, we have half past. So this is 30 minutes after the hour, half past 6. And then you could also say 6:30. And quarter past. So quarter past is 15 minutes after the hour. And you might also say 7:15 or quarter past 7. Now, in terms of regular meetings, because sometimes a meeting doesn't just happen once, it happens multiple times. Some phrases we can use are biannual. So biannual means something that happens every 2 years. Bi-weekly is something that happens every 2 weeks. So this bi means 2. Once a, and then you can fill in the how often it happens. So if it's once a week, that means it happens 1 time a week. Once a year means it happens 1 time a year. And then also just fill in the number, and you can have 2 times, 3 times, 4 times instead of once, because once is obviously only for 1. So now we're going to have a look at the types of meeting. Of course, you want it to be clear to your guests what kind of meeting you are holding so that they can be prepared and they know what to expect. So one type of meeting is an annual general meeting. So as I mentioned, annual, this word came up before. It's something that happens once a year. So it's a meeting that takes place once a year, and it's held between the general members of an organization. So a very, very large company-wide meeting. Next, we have a board meeting. So perhaps the company you work for has a board of directors who oversee how things work at the company. A board meeting will be a meeting for all of the people on this board who take care of the smooth runnings of the company. Another meeting, you might have a status update meeting. This is a meeting to give information on the progress of a particular piece of work or project. So perhaps you have been working on a project for the last week and you want to have a status update just to let everyone know how things are going. Then there might be a workshop, another type of meeting, which is usually quite intensive, an intensive discussion or activity centered often around learning and collaboration on a particular objective or project. Next, we have a brainstorm. So brainstorms are quite fun. A brainstorm is a meeting which is designed for everyone to come up with lots and lots of ideas. Now, finally, you might have a one-on-one or a one-to-one. This is a meeting where there are only two people. So if you are organizing a one-on-one and you say, hello, I would like to meet with you on Thursday for a one-on-one meeting, that person knows that they are going to be the only other guest besides you. So those are some types of meeting. And once they know what type of meeting it is, you want to get a bit more specific with the objectives of the meeting. So you can start by saying the purpose of the meeting is. Now this lays out to your guests what the point of the meeting is, what you are trying to achieve. And then following this, you can say, so the full sentence would be, the purpose of this meeting is to go over. So you would always need to include this to afterwards to put it in the infinitive, put the verb in the infinitive, to go over, which means to look at something carefully again. So if you have done a piece of work and now you want to look over it to make sure everything is correct, you are going over it. Again, we might say to touch base on. So touch base on is to check in, to catch up. Similarly to what we said with a status update meeting, it's to check in on any progress or any changes that have been made. And finally, you might say the purpose of this meeting is to pin down. Now, to pin down is to make a final decision on something. So you might want to say this meeting is to pin down the decision for what we're going to name all of our new modules, for instance. So now we will have a look at assigning roles. This is another important part of sending an invitation because you want your guests to be as prepared as possible. This is the essential thing for planning a business meeting is preparation and making sure everyone knows what is going to happen and what they are going to be doing. So for starters, to introduce what the role will be for a particular guest, you can say, you will be, and then follow that with either in charge of, and then say what they're going to be in charge of, or follow it directly with the role title. So we have a few role titles. So the chair is the person in charge of a meeting. A facilitator is also in charge of a meeting, but more so making sure that the meeting runs smoothly. So they will be trying to make sure that everyone is communicating well and listening to one another. So it's a very important job. Now, a timekeeper, again, is another important job. When you create your agenda, which lays out the objectives, which we just spoke about, you can assign a particular amount of time that you want to spend on each agenda item. And so then the timekeeper will check that you are sticking to this timetable that you laid out, and will also make sure that the meeting does not overrun. And finally, we have the minute taker. So the minute or minutes taker, this is someone who's in charge of taking minutes. And minutes are essentially the notes about what has been said in the meeting. This is a very important job because, of course, if lots of people are talking during a meeting, you don't want to lose all of the valuable things that people have said. So it's important when you're planning a meeting to always make sure you have organized for someone to be taking minutes. And again, in terms of preparation, you might like to attach some reading material. So reading material or any preliminary documents are things that you would like your guests to read before they come to the meeting to help them be well prepared. So in your email or your invitation, you can say, please find attached the documents for tomorrow's meeting. This means you have included them in the invitation, assuming this is maybe an email or a message on another type of platform. Then you can say, please find attached, and they will be down there. Please read through. This is another instruction about the expectation of what you want your guests to do. So you will want them to read through everything before they come to the meeting. And finally, to familiarize yourself. So familiarize yourself is to make sure that you understand something, that you are familiar with something, and that when it comes to the meeting, this won't be the first time that you have heard of it. So now we will test your knowledge again. So can you tell me, what are the meeting roles associated with each of these pictures? Yes, brilliant, Christelle. So for number one, we have a timekeeper. And number two, great. I'm very glad to see you've all been listening and retaining all of this information. So we have a timekeeper and a minute taker. Now, what is the type of meeting that is used to come up with lots of ideas? What do we call this type of meeting? Brilliant. Everyone has got it. Great. So indeed, it is a brainstorm. Now, the next question, which of these sentences is correct? The purpose on this meeting is to touch base on your progress. The purpose of this meeting is to go under the work you have done. Or the purpose of this meeting is to pin down a plan for the next month. And you can have some bonus points if you get the answer. Great. Can you tell me what is wrong with the sentences that you don't think are correct? Can you type in the chat what you think is wrong with them? What are the mistakes? Great, Stefan, it is indeed go over, not go under. Can anyone tell me what is wrong? So we have established that number three is the correct answer. The purpose of this meeting is to pin down a plan for the next month. Yeah, on this meeting, exactly. So indeed, it is to say, you're supposed to say the purpose of this meeting is to touch base on your progress. Great. Brilliant. So I see you all remember the grammar that goes with each of these phrases. So now we mentioned, obviously, what an important job taking minutes was. So now we're just going to have a little look at taking minutes. So often when people are taking minutes, it's useful to use a template, which will just allow you to jot all of the information down. Jot down, that's a phrase which is used to mean just quickly write down. I'll just write it in the chat so that you all remember it. Jot down. So you can be jotting down pieces of vocab now if you like. But these are some words that you might see on a template, or maybe words that you would like to use if you are making your own template. The key information you need to include in your minutes. So, of course, you need to include the location, where the meeting took place. The venue is also another word for the location, perhaps a bit more specific. Then an attendance list. So an attendance list is a list of all the people who were in attendance. But the attendance list will usually be all the people who were invited, and then you will tick off or write down the people who actually came, and then the people who weren't, you can write that down too. And in order to obviously make a correct attendance list, you're going to need to know who was present, which means they were at the meeting, versus who was absent, which means they were not at the meeting. And for people who were present, we call these attendees. And people who were not present, we call these absentees. So obviously absentees comes from the word absent, and then attendees comes from people who were in attendance. Now, motion, depending on the type of meeting you're having, this might not be very relevant, but if someone is presenting a motion, this is presenting an idea or a suggestion, and then people in the meeting will be voting on deciding whether they want to put into practice, to implement that idea or suggestion. So if there is a motion that's relevant for the meeting, you would need to write it down, and then you would also need to take note of the result of the vote. Of course, if you made any major decisions in the meeting, anything that was decided upon, then you need to write that down too. And if you were maybe doing some planning for the future, or if you identified particular tasks that needed to be done following the meeting, then these would go under next steps. So next steps are the things you are going to do next after the meeting. And finally, the any other business section. So we mentioned the agenda earlier on. This is where you laid out the topics that were going to be covered in the meeting. And at the bottom of the agenda will be any other business. And this needs to be included in the minutes. And any other business is for someone who mentions something that wasn't on the agenda, but that they still wanted to discuss in the meeting. So when it gets to the end of the meeting, you can say, does anyone have any other business? And then perhaps someone might have something that they've been thinking about that they want to bring up. So those are the key bits of information that need to be in the minutes. Now, again, we are going to test your knowledge. So can anyone tell me what is the opposite of an absentee? What is the opposite word? Brilliant. Exactly. So these are attendees. If someone was at the meeting, then they are an attendee. And next, brilliant, you all got it right. What is the name of the section referring to anything that was not included on the initial agenda? So Samia, present is definitely the opposite of absent. But if we're talking about what we call the people, how we refer to them, then the noun would be attendees. And then present is the adjective to describe them. So they were present or they were absent. Brilliant, Evelyn. So any other business, that is the final section that always needs to be included on the minutes. Any other business. Well, great, everyone. I'm so glad that you were all listening. It was great to see all of you doing so well on the Test Your Knowledge. You got all of the answers, so very well done. I hope you all feel like you have learned something today. We will be having another webinar next week, so please do join us. We will again be talking about business meetings, so come back. Si ce webinaire vous a plu et que vous souhaitez approfondir votre pratique de l'anglais, n'hésitez pas à faire une demande d'information sur notre site internet Nous serons heureux de vous présenter nos formations en détail et même de vous proposer un test de niveau gratuit à l'oral avec un de nos professeurs. So please do sign up. Look at our website if you are interested in having English lessons. You are all very welcome. Bye-bye. Take care. I hope you enjoyed the webinar.